F1?
Yes, this is an update on valuation and the recent impact it's had on people's income, or people's property taxes. I'm going to talk for a second, and then I'm going to turn over to the Assessor Brent Martin. Brent came in 2015. In 2016, we really wanted to take a good understanding of where we were, and we realized as we were looking late into 2016 that for a vast majority of Belfast, an awful lot of the property had not had the valuation of the property, the land where the house or the building is located, changed very much over the last 12 to 15 years. And we knew that in certain sections of the city, the differences between what market values were, which is what the law is, and what valuations were, was getting much wider in certain sections of the city than it was in others. This is something we should have fixed if we could have gone back in time earlier in years, back in 2007, 2008, when the market crashed. We were looking at doing a revaluation then, and so were a lot of other municipalities, and we all pulled back because the market had dropped and we wanted to see its relative effect on real estate values. The market came back a little bit slower, but for the last couple of years, it's been back somewhat more with a vengeance, and so the disparity has been there. So we knew we were going to run into this problem, and we wanted to find a way to try and let the community know we were going to have to come back and really take a look at your valuations and perhaps change them in a significant way. We purposely waited till the meetings in January of 2017 to bring this subject forward, so holidays were out of the way. We put a big manager's report on it. We talked about it quite a bit at the meeting, and the Republican Journal wrote a pretty nice long story about it in the newspaper the next day. So we thought, we had been effective in getting people alerted to the fact that we were going to spend the next 6 months looking at their valuations and trying to bring legal fairness that we have to bring to our tax valuation structure. We obviously failed. There's a lot of people out there I've talked to a number of them who said, I wasn't prepared to see my property value go up this much. They just didn't connect that we were working on this process, even though we've talked about it a number of times. And I feel bad about that. We thought we had done it, but we hadn't. People are saying, well, how come it went up so much so quickly? And it's reflective of it not going up much over the last 12 to 15 years, particularly on land values. One of the things we wanted to do, to be fair to people, was if we were looking at raising the land values, we wanted to make sure their condition values were also looked at. And in many cases, while we raised land values, we depressed condition values of the structures that were on them. So it was kind of a mixed bag for some people. For some people, it was a double whammy. It was a big increase in land value, and it was an increase overall in their total value. I've had a couple of people stop me and say, couldn't we feather this pain in? If we're going to go up, and I tell you, I've seen people whose values were $55,000 for 12 to 15 years. Their values went to $110,000 in 1 year on their property. It should have been going up 10 or 15,000 over the last 6 or 7 years, but it didn't, and all caught up at once. And the answer is why we can't feather it in is because the law won't allow us to feather it in. If we know a property is worth $125,000, we can't go on the low side and say, well, we'll get there in 3 years, because that's not fair to everybody else in the valuation pool. Our charge is to not make the values are not the same in every neighborhood. There's different variables that come into play, but our relationship to their full value has to be comparable. We can't have a section of the city where the values are 90% of valuation is what the real market price is, in other areas where it's 60% or 70%. That's an unfair tax system, and we're not allowed to do that by law. I just recently had a department head meeting, and all we talked about was communication. And we think sometimes we're communicating, and here's a place where we didn't do it good enough, and I apologize to the council and to the community and to the taxpayers who are affected by that. Brent will mention this too, but you can discuss your tax bill if you think we're wrong. You've got 6 months. We don't have to rush out tomorrow. You could pay your first half of your taxes, dispute them. If the assessor agrees they should be lowered, we can give you a check back. So there's a lot of mechanisms here where we can work with people if they feel that they've been overvalued and their taxes are impacted. The process part, that's my role. The technical part is Brent's role, and I thought we had discussed it enough and it was out there enough, but when your valuation goes from 55,000 to 110,000 1 year, that probably wasn't enough communication. I probably should have sent a $2,000 mailing out to 4,000 people and say, this is the year we're going to try and catch up, and we can't do it a little bit. We got to get there to where it is to follow the law. So I'll turn this over to Brent, and he can help answer any questions maybe you have, and he's got a couple points to raise himself.
Yes. I thought I would have to give my whereabouts before showing up tonight anyway. Nobody likes a surprise, and I'm learning that. I haven't been in government before, and in that respect, a lot of the surprise factor would fall back on me as well. Some of it I didn't know until I got further along in the process in terms of what needed to be completed within a year, so that we could be in good standing to be able to make certain claims with the state, to report certain values and certain percentages, and on one hand, decrease the mill rate, which sounded good to some people and has been good to some people, especially in some of the rural areas, but that didn't clearly state that that comes at the expense of some of the property owners that are within the bypass, in particularly because of either the water influence or downtown influence. Joe touched on feathering in values. It's one of those things where once you're closer, and this gets a little technical, but you're closer to a better quality rating with the state, you can track the market more easily, and so there's not a surprise, and that can happen because of technology now over a period of time. That's what I hope to do from here forward, so it's just tweaks and we never ever have a surprise again. For who's been adjusted so far, I want to say first, because I still have other parts to go look at. That being said, I wanted to just read through, because this is the type of summary I wanted to have included in the tax bills. I unfortunately, between getting the tax bills printed and done after commitment, the weekend came, and then due to the efficiency downstairs, they were already ready to go out the door. So that was my fault not getting this summary in there or posted. But there's this is basically a summary of what it is that I've done, and the reason why I've done it I'll clarify afterwards. The state recognizes the need to equalize valuations so that no one taxpayer pays more or less than their fair share of the tax burden. The need to have a revaluation or equalization may be due to the lack of an inventory or due to a change in market activity or market value. The constitutional requirement for tax assessments is the seasonable attainment of a rough equality in tax treatment of similarly situated property owners. All taxes upon real and personal estate assessed by authority of this state shall be apportioned and assessed equally according to the just value or market value thereof. This is basically equal apportionment. And what it is that the past couple of years, both prior to me being here and after I'd gotten here, there was a disparity, an increasing disparity of the in-town properties or the water influence properties because of the increase in market conditions, the better market conditions. The assessed values were lower and lower as compared to the sale prices or the market value of those respective categories or areas, locations. That made that less fair to those properties that are primarily in the rural areas, as they were closer to already assessed at 100%. So it's a complicated process when we're dealing with 37 tax maps to dissect out of the several hundred sales that were analyzed over the last several years. How do I make sure that I'm going through a congruent area, a contiguous area, a similarly influenced area, and notch the percentages upward for the group that does get touched, to use that word, or adjusted to market value, so that it can be the least impact possible, which in this case I tried to get to about 92% of market value for a group as a whole, and that's a median number. And then the properties that I could not get to within a one-year time period, that those already would be at 92%, so that those not touched and those touched are now equally apportioned at 92%. That's basically what we accomplished with the adjustments that we've made. That's not to say that some adjustments that are out there are 100% correct, and I always welcome people in the door. I'm trying to call back as many as I can at this point, or by email, either way. It does not have to be the rush that some people feel that it should be, and I'm glad to talk things through, but the process still continues the same, and again, adjustments can be made at any point in the process. On the other side of things, we've had a fair number of people that have come in over the past several years, and in some cases had properties that were listed for sale that were not selling at assessed values. Now those are assessed more equal to what the listing prices are for those parts of the market. Quality of data. That means that the quality of the data we feel in town and the areas that have been adjusted is closer to being correct, and we will see that with the data that we report to the state this year, versus the areas outside of town, which I still have to go to. I feel that that quality of data is not as good as what we've now looked at. So I can only say that the area that's not been touched is at about 92%, and the areas that has been touched is at about 92%. But I want the quality of those rural areas to be looked at as well to make sure that everybody's on the same page. So with that, again, I don't like the surprise. I'm sorry for that, for those people that are out there, and I'm willing to talk things through with everybody. But it comes down to getting to that market value or a equal percentage of market value. And Joe touched on it, and I talked to him before about it. I don't have a mechanism in place to where I can do that. Now that people or properties in general are closer to the same percentage away from market, the idea is to be able to keep things more level over a period of time. Love it here. The people have been great overall, and I'm doing what I can.
So Brent,
Yes.
this is a lot to absorb for a lot of people. And if you're in a total state of shock because your land value was doubled, you're not only in a state of shock, you're mad.
Correct.
So I'm gonna now move the one notch further in the conversation, because if your primary residence in the state of Maine, and if you apply for it after a year being the owner of your primary residence in the state of Maine, you can apply for homestead exemption.
Correct.
And the dollar value of that can change each year.
Correct.
And one of the requirements that the state attaches to that is that the valuation of the town has to be within 10 percentage points of 100% of fair market value valuation. And if it's not, then you don't have the opportunity to get the full homestead exemption.
Right. You would get the equivalent percentage of that exemption as to what the municipality's certified ratio is as declared with the state.
So this year, it's $20,000.
And we now have that in full, which is up from 13.5, and we may have been at only 80% this year, so it would have only gone to 16,000.
So there is an overall benefit to anyone who has homestead exemption this year of
Yes.
20,000
in value.
off the top of their valuation. And
Yes.
I understand if you're the person whose land value doubled, that doesn't
Small consolation.
That doesn't help you feel better at all,
Yeah.
but it does help a lot of people.
It does, and it's the same with also veterans or blind exemptions. The other exemptions also follow the ratio. So we have 26,000 now instead of what might have only been around 21 for those that have multiple exemptions. But again, for those that have specifically large jumps, in general, we're seeing that there had not been adjustments made since sometimes even prior to 2003. Mm-hmm. And so it's, I hope there's not a surprise like that again for.
So here's another question that I've been asked. So you started talking 2 budgets ago, over a year ago, you started talking about the fact that you were having to look at, analyze, revalue properties south of Northport Avenue, south of Northport Avenue and
Yes.
High Street because of water influence sales. And then you started talking this budget season about downtown. You didn't specifically several times really home in that it was like really start to hit your brain about properties that were within the bypass on the other side of Northport Avenue or High Street, or not in the downtown district.
The whole inside the
So there are
bypass.
people who have been thrown, who might have been paying attention, watching meetings, reading the
Yes.
newspaper, et cetera, listening to budget meetings, who were surprised
Yes,
because they weren't in what they considered waterfront, water view areas, and they weren't in the downtown. They might
Right.
be in a walk to downtown area. So can you talk just a little bit about that?
that's at the time, it's okay, I see where the data is leading us, and we're not going to sufficiently move the needle away from 90%.
To meet the state requirements?
Correct. And so it did lead me to have to get into the rest of the area, which included even some of the commercial properties within the bypass as well. One of the things to consider is that when we are not at 100%, then large commercial properties as well can say, well, if really you're only valuing the individual little residential properties out there at 90%, or if we were going to 80%, then on our income approach, one of the last adjustments is we'd like you to move us down to 80% of that income approach value. And it is a large adjustment. So if we were not moving the needle sufficiently, there were other things that I was weighing at the time that now I can honestly say the in-town commercial properties are closer to 100%, and those are the most similar to some of the other commercial properties. And the residential properties are closer to 100%. Across the board, it is 100%. So there was a reason for it, and it was necessary. Believe me, I did not like to push myself through 80-plus hour weeks, but we did get it done. It's just I kind of drowned 5 feet from the shoreline and not getting the message out at the end of this, and I apologize for that. One of the most sensitive calls that I ever receive is when someone says, this difference is the difference with me staying in the home. And I need for those people to contact me because whether there's hardship abatements, it might only be a one-year consideration, but at least it buys people time to try to see whether or not their living arrangement's suitable. And this circuit breaker or the tax relief program through the state, if it's a higher percentage now of their income, those are tax avenues that are available to people. I can't really speak to that, but they are available, and I am more than happy to first verify the condition of the property on an invite out to the place, but then if it's beyond what I can adjust or what I find there, then I will definitely help what I can on the other.
So you are open for citizens, taxpayers to
Haven't.
contact you in whatever way is comfortable for them?
Very much, just be patient. Sometimes we've had only 2 people cross the threshold, and I'm reading Bram Stoker with my daughter right now. She's got to go through Dracula, and there's a couple scenes in there, but on the whole, everybody's been very, very,
Take her to see Frankenstein. Mike?
very,
So the goal is, because I've always heard 100%, 80%, 90%, that if I look at my tax bill and I was thinking about selling my house, the valuation you've judged should be roughly what the market would be.
yes,
Okay.
it's a rough
So,
representation.
I had people, certainly not as many as darkened your door, but enough people that, and by the way, my wife and I got this little stack of mailings, all the different little tax bills. And somebody said, well, why can't you do the feathering in? Or why can't you, for this person who's older, like you just said, the difference of, and, I'm reminded, so I was sitting here, not just reading baseball. So the Maine Constitution, the Roman numerals IX or 1X, Article 9, Section 7, the 7 and 8, it's in the Maine Constitution. We're not really allowed to to make this up on the go. This is set in the Maine Constitution that we have to valuation. While the public expenses shall be assessed on estates, a general valuation be taken at least once in 10 years. We didn't do that. We're doing some catch-up now. Secondly, Section 8, taxation.
Actually, Mike, first to that point,
Yeah,
it technically is met, and this is per Department of Property Taxation, that is technically met yearly because of the process we
because
now
you're
use
doing
of the
that,
sales
yes.
ratio study.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we technically meet that every
You know, but
year.
many people are used to a reval that's just this giant thing, and everybody knows it's happening. Everybody kind of dreads it, and then it comes down the pike like a giant object, and everybody knows it's happening. That didn't happen in this case. We're doing all these revals, so I appreciate that. And I just want to read the second portion, which is Section 8, which really goes to feathering it, or whatever they called it, or why can't you adjust for, I've been living on Ocean Street for the last 50 years, and when I bought it for $18,000, why is it now valued at $400,000? And that is a tough situation for somebody who bought it. They might have been I know people who were working in the chicken plants who bought homes very inexpensively, working not low income, but, very modest income. And the neighborhood's grown up around them, and now their taxes are just, really hammering them. So Section 8, taxation. All taxes upon real and personal estate assessed by the authority of this state shall be apportioned and assessed equally according to the just value thereof. And they're not messing around when they say that. That's in the Maine Constitution. So when somebody says, for Frankenstein over here, Eric, who's going to be playing Frankenstein, what's my motivation? This is our motivation. That this is a really hard thing. How do you run government? How do you send people a tax bill? Nobody likes a tax bill. But this is where we start. This is where these rules are made up.
Mary?
So during, I'm going to take it to the next step. I know during the last two budget conversations, we've talked about this, and maybe in January we talked about this, because I bring it up every time. So in Maine state law, in terms of taxation, if a town's total valuation slips to 70%, then the town is required to do a total valuation. And so Belfast was totally revaled in 1990, and again in 2003.
Correct.
So there was a 13-year span there. We're now in 2017, so 3 to 17, so there's 14 years. Back in 7, 8, 9, somewhere in there, or maybe it was a little after that, when your predecessor was still here in the job, for 2 years, he was making noises about the fact that he thought we were coming up on a total reval. And our sales fair market value did not change as he thought it was going to. We fell behind some southern towns in Maine in terms of that activity. And so he was doing what you have just gone through in terms of revaling certain areas where maybe there was a pocket of sales activity. So the state, as you read, and as Brent mentioned earlier, does allow that reval of where there are little hot pockets of activity.
Yes.
On a yearly, annual basis. In fact, they kind of force you to do it,
Yes.
because they are auditing you each year and requiring those reports. So when you do a town's total reval, it's a very expensive proposition. Very often, you are hiring a firm outside of your own assessing department to take on that project.
Yes.
And I don't remember the exact numbers, but they're horrific in terms of what the cost of that can be.
Depending on the level, smaller pockets in Belfast probably would have been 150,000. And the overall revaluation, I'm guessing 4 to 7 individuals from a firm for probably $450,000, maybe greater depending on what they would value the revaluation of some of the more complex properties.
So from another point of view of not having to expend that money of taxpayers, adding to the budget to cover that, these annual revals of the hot pockets of activity are helping that as we move forward,
Yes.
to kind of stretch.
Now
how
that we're
often
at
you have to do that.
92%, which I did remit the data back to the state, and they ran what was in place and came back, you can be at 100%. So we were able to maintain declaring 100% with the state. So we have gotten away from a requirement, a 70% requirement. We are at least 22% away from that now.
So I'm going to ask another question. Now I'm at home, I'm watching this, I'm listening to this, maybe tomorrow I'm looking at it on my computer, and I'm still mad as hell. And I have a tax bill that says my taxes for the first half of the year are due on, I forget what date.
November 3rd.
I've blocked it totally out. I got one of those packets of bills. But we do save money because we mail multiple bills in the same envelope, one stamp. Make you really happy when you open that envelope. So I'm really mad. I've got this big increase in my taxes due that I didn't plan for. Maybe I'm on a fixed income, maybe I'm whatever. How do people proceed forward? They've called you, they've emailed you, they've written you, or they haven't gotten calm enough to do that yet. What is their responsibility and how can they deal with this new bill which they can't afford to pay right now?
Well, that part's overstepping a little, but I will say the steps on
go
what
for
I
it.
can. The first is, again, having my hand somewhat forced on, I had to detach myself. The numbers have been supported where they've been supported in the market for too long,
Right.
which is why these numbers were getting worse for me to deal with on the.
And so you will walk people through on
I
their
will walk
particular
people.
property?
Yes, and I will walk through that. Number one, it's under what's called Rule 706. Please let me come out and see the property if there's any question over the interior. This was a street viewed, curbside view process on all of these properties, but we literally were in front of every one of these properties that had been changed. That's number one. Number two is, because of that, there's an assumption that the interior is in keeping with the exterior. There may be other data available from sales data online, from Maine listings. So we may have seen that and taken that into consideration, but we may not have. So first and foremost, let me see what's actually there. You don't have to. But if I don't see what's there, there's not a good presumption going forward. After I see it, and if it's found that there's a disparity between what I thought was there and what is actually there, I will be glad to make an adjustment. I am not just trying to say, well, this is this. There's a lot of properties that were handled, and I've done what I could to be as accurate as I could. But I am not there to simply say, well, I want to just stick you with that and I want to be right. That's not what I do. So there's that step. Then if we still do not come to terms, or I'm confident on the value, then the next step is I will write a letter and say, well, this is where we are, and I will include with that whatever necessary paperwork would be needed for you to appeal that, should you so choose. And I will walk you through that as well, if necessary. So it is not something that I'm trying to say, I'm 100% right all the time, I can't do it. But I tried to get as close to right and as close to 100% without going over 100%, as opposed to just going to 100% with everybody.
And if in fact there is a hardship situation, you will be able to be helpful to guide people in the
Absolutely.
next step?
down to general assistance, as well as we've already today started to print out the circuit breaker information as well, which there's contact phone numbers with the state for that. And we already have someone who was not taking advantage of that. So from here forward, whatever benefits are there for that, they now are aware of that. So we're trying. It's not a comfortable spot. I just had to get certain numbers to fit, and it's kind of a, it's kind of a cold process at times in terms of where the numbers work and where they aren't right.
And brief definition of the circuit breaker program.
I think it's called Taxpayer Relief Program, but if you Google Maine Maine Circuit Breaker Program, I think it's the first or second item that typically pops up, and it's sponsored by the state of Maine.
And does it relate to the
Income.
percentage of your taxes to your
Yes.
income?
Yes, and so in
Once
some,
it crosses a certain line?
correct. And we will help where we can with that. We've not yet reached out to the state, and I definitely wouldn't mind doing so now that I'm talking this through with you. Finding a contact in the state for those situations where that does come up, so we can have kind of a handoff on that.
I think that
So,
would be nice if you were able to do that to help people.
not a problem at all. Not a problem at
John?
all.
Are you done?
I am. Thank you
That's-
very
that's- That's very good, thank you.
Yes.
It was probably about a year ago or something that you let us know that we needed to do this sort of locational revaluation. I was wondering, in terms of beginning to provide warning for the future, are there parts of Belfast that you think that might need similar sorts of pocket revaluations for next year, that we might be able to put up those red flags now?
Well, another part of I can't remember if it's a statute or in the Constitution, I think it's a statute, and this goes to kind of the days of old, but the state does have in place an expectation that we more or less visit properties once every 4 years. So starting more or less with the rural part of map 6, I'm going to start that process around. At the same time, in about 2 weeks from now, based on last year's date, I'll get back the new turnaround document, which is the initial state's disclosure to me. These are all the sales that we've seen happen in the last year, and now that process starts all over for me again, where I indicate which ones are valid sales, what our assessments are versus the sale prices reported, and we start that over. So I expect to see a better quality rating on that, which means the 92% number. But with that, I will also start to see what I expect to see, if I'm going to speculate right here, is that some of the other outside the bypass but near the bypass will continue to be a little bit further away from the 92%. So we'll be probably around map 4, down around that area will be the first area. And then if you're familiar with the tax maps, it would be map 4, and then up around map 1 and starting around on the outskirts of Belfast. I do not anticipate being in town Belfast except for visiting individual properties here and there at request. We really did get past most properties in town.
What about waterfront on east side?
We had gone through a fair amount of that.
Okay, you have.
Yes, all the way up around the Horn on Kayla Road, Robbins Road, all the way down from Route 1 towards the water as well. So, that's been done, and we'll revisit sort of as this whole clock now starts to move,
Thank you.
so.
Thank you. Mike?
Yeah, I don't know if you've mentioned it, but BETR, BETR, Business Equipment Tax Refund. A surprising amount of businesses never have heard of it, don't know that they're eligible for almost 100% refund.
Well, there's BETI and BETR. BETI is the business equipment tax exempt, and we do have a fair number of filers for that. And it has to do with, on the front end, certain types of property would be exempt right out of the gate. Of that property that's exempt, Belfast gets reimbursed a percentage of that yearly from the state. The BETR program is typically older equipment, but it's been in use for X period of time, and if they've not implemented it in the past, then they can implement that type of equipment, and it will be something that they've paid tax yearly on as personal property, But the following year, they file that form, 801A and 801B, depending on what type of equipment. And those forms will allow them to actually be reimbursed for the taxes they paid the year prior. The forms we send back to them after signing off, basically, it allows them to get the reimbursement because it confirms with the state they paid the
So
tax.
in my office, for instance, I had a tax bill for business equipment of like $69 or something, you know,
Yeah.
like junk chairs and whatever. But for people like Matthews Brothers or people who are real, Front Street Shipyard, lots of stuff, all valued, and they're paying business equipment tax, just like property tax on that equipment.
Yes.
You know, I'm just saying it again because I'm amazed sometimes. I'll ask people with a lot of equipment, ask them, do you know you can file for a refund? They never heard of it, so,
Yeah.
you know.
Now, a lot is, mostly upstairs, we deal with Betty, more people are filing Betty, and those with large amounts of business equipment are pretty much on top of that, because we had extensive lists.
So the only last thing
Yeah.
is, you know, when I was opening all these envelopes, I feel like that is a time when you really have people's attention. You know, like, you're sending them a bill for thousands of dollars, you know, including information on these programs, the circuit breaker or whatever.
That's a good
Better
point.
program would be a really good thing, like, right in it.
We thought of this year of printing even on the back of tax bills, either the summary of what I'd completed, et cetera.
Yeah.
And I, as I said, I kind of drowned 5 feet from the shore on that
Sure.
at the end of it.
Thank you.
One last question. Homestead exemption. So hopefully, if you've been here for a while in the state of Maine, you know about homestead exemption, but maybe you don't, and you should. Or maybe you've moved here recently from another state that maybe didn't have it. So what do people do to get homestead
As
exemption?
soon as you buy a house in Belfast and you plan on it being your permanent residence, domicile, whatever you want to call it, file with us. We will put it in the file so that once you're legally eligible for it, we will put it in place at that earliest time period,
And that is 1 year?
typically 1 year afterwards. There are rare occasions where, and it's happened this past year actually once, where if an individual owns another property where there's already homestead on that, when they buy the property in Belfast, we can't move that over because you can't have two. And what later happened was that property was sold and we never received a filing from them. So April 1st came around and they've missed a year of homestead. I'm trying with the state to see if there's something on that, but right now. But, so as long as we don't verify this homestead anywhere else, or we can't verify, or it is not somewhere else, then we will put that in place as soon as they're eligible. And it's, again, $438 right now, so it was a good amount of money this year.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Brent.
Thank you.